some of the things that we're talking about at Cognizant right now is trying to get your cold call mojo back, right? Trying to get your cold call mojo back. And for me, it's about detaching from outcomes, focusing on conversations. What are some of the ways that you think reps can use to get their mojo back? Anything besides pattern disruptors, or just maybe just detaching from outcomes that you preach or think about that help others to get more excited about cold calling?
Yeah, cold calling, like you said, I mean, I've somebody that's made probably tens of thousands of calls in his career. It can be a grind, right? And it's a big mental battle, oftentimes against yourself. So for me, for myself and the teams that I've led and people that I've coached or company that I've consulted with, part of I think what people can do, especially if you have a team with you, is to sort of gamify like, how do you make cold calling fun, right? So cold calling can be draining. How do you add energy back into it? And some of them can be silly, but sort of that might sometimes that's the point, is to just add some levity to what it is we view as kind of this important but can be feel like a grind sometimes aspect of successful selling. So, one thing Landon Meyer and I shared on LinkedIn a few weeks ago was a cold call objection bingo card. And I used to do that with teams. It's like, okay, like first one to get all the objective, like to get bingo on the bingo card, get something. It doesn't have to be significant, but, just reframing, hey, okay, like I might get these objections, but hey, it's fun. We're and we're trying to hear. And I've seen some that get like super specific, where it's like, okay. And it's interesting. I was working for a computer dealership in Minnesota one time, and we did the cold call bingo thing. And we decided to go one week with a really unique one where it was like very, very specific objections. Like
You're
they
like
weren't like
you're seeking these out by your questions.
and, and no, absolutely. And what ended up happening, you hear on the calls in the bullpen that people were starting to like ask these really specific questions that almost seemed like they were trying to get the objection. But interesting, what we found was because they altered their talk track to be like that pointed, I think part of it was a pattern disrupt where they were saying things that people weren't expecting, but because they were being so concise and firm on like a stance, that they weren't getting mild reactions. They were getting very firm, like, hey, I agree with that statement, or hey, that's completely wrong, which interestingly let it carry the conversation forward. So again, so you can use gamification to make things more fun, but oftentimes what you'll find is that given the right sort of thought process, it can also make things more effective from a technical standpoint. The other thing I think of as well is, how do you motivate yourself through the calls? So I did a video a few weeks ago where I talked about, hey, when I was a first time AE, every time I picked up the phone, even if I got a no, I made $6.67. And it was because I took I was making 50 to 70 dials a day. When I was a young AE, I just kind of made right around 100 grand, right at that six-figure mark. And so I thought, okay, take how many calls I make, divide into what I make. So, and this is what I make every time I pick up the phone, because I know that every no is one no closer to the yes I need to earn. And for me, so when I went through a string of like 10 really bad calls, or like 10 calls where it was a flat out no, or I didn't get an answer, I think to myself, well, it just took me 10 minutes to make those 10 calls and made $66.70, right? Because it's sort of, and I had that actually on a post-it on my desk, because hey, every dial you make, whether they say yes or no, you just made $7, right? So just to remind yourself that the outcomes that we want in terms, especially if you're money motivated, you're driven toward income, requires all this sweat equity. So why not remind yourself of that, right? And hey, like that was a tough no, but in the aggregate, I'm moving the chain right on getting to that goal. So there are sort of mental tricks like that I've recommended and had people use in regardless of industry, because I think it's sort of universal to think about, oh, okay, well, yeah, that was a no, but I'm still getting something out of this progression, right? Um, Sort of a maybe oldie but a goodie is also like, how much energy do you have when you're calling? Not only because, so Brian Tracy said, right, that 50% of selling is the transfer of enthusiasm from you to whoever you're selling to. But I think the missing element to that thought is that when you generally have energy, it also just picks you up, right? So it's not so much about, hey, conveying enthusiasm so that Ryan, who I'm calling, says, "Hey, this guy's excited about what he's talking about, so I'm maybe piques my interest and I want to meet." But do you have that sustained energy? Do you kind of have that energy, and does it pick you up to call the next person? There was a guy, I won't say his name, but I'll say his nickname, that we worked with at a copier dealership. It was a team of like 20 reps, and his nickname was Gunslinger because every time he was on the phone, he would gesticulate. He'd be talking like this the whole time, and even though he's on the phone, so his nickname was Gunslinger. And his thing was, he would, if he had 10 bad calls in a row, he, sitting at his desk, would make the next 10 calls on speakerphone, and so the whole bullpen could hear it. And for him, it was a game. Like, okay, like, I'm gonna show like people who are near me that I can make these calls. Like, and when he would get a rough objection, and he would work his way through it. So he found that way to make it fun and energizing for him. It was kind of like that game time performance, right? Like, okay, like the pressure's on, people are hearing me. Like, I want to show them that I can do this, even though I just had 10 bad calls in a row. So it's these kind of things that we can do to energize ourselves. And you just need to figure out which one is motivating to you, right? Do you work better under the pressure to perform? Do you work better, on if it's light and humorous? And so, how do you incorporate that?
I love that. The cold call bingo concept. I remember seeing that post recently. I was like, that's a really great idea. I think it's super smart to try to do that those specific objections. To your point, like that's a great way to train those specific questions that may not be asked. I think that's not just a motivator for the rep, but like a great training mechanism if you're a leader listening to this, to get your reps to ask those more difficult questions, trying to elicit the response that is not necessarily an objection. It's the information we're trying to receive, right? That very pointed. So I love that idea you had. I also think that the your idea of reverse engineering, I call that the math of sales, right? So how many dials does it take to get a conversation? How many conversations does it take to get a meeting? How many meetings to get an opportunity to close? I always use that concept to help me understand what I need to do. And I've also used that for organizations to understand the cost of each of those mechanisms. Like, hey, company, did you know? And it's funny you said $6.66. It's like, it's probably between $6 and $10 every time someone dials. But the fact that you flip that to, it's not like, from a sales rep perspective, it's like, no, I'm making that because that is what you're making, right? If you take your base plus your commission, every time you click that dial button, that's $6 in your bank account. That's what it is if you keep doing it. Because your math of sales, you know that if you do this many dials, you're gonna have this many conversations and this many, like I freaking love that. I love that idea. And it's just a different thought process of how to leverage like the reality of it, right? Because that's what's going to happen if you're a true sales master, as you are here, Dale. And then the final piece around bringing it in public. It's funny the motivators we have, but there's you're talking about Landon and Nooks and different tools like that. So if you're a virtual seller, finding ways to maybe invite people in, even if it's just a Zoom or something like a Nooks where you could call along other people, that could be motivating in a remote mile. Those are all really, really great tips. Thank you for sharing. Get me. You passed your enthusiasm over to me, but
Yeah.
I'm
And I
gonna.
think that last point you made is great. So when the pandemic hit, right? I was working at a company where we're traditionally outside. We're regional in that we're selling just to people that we could physically go see,
Yeah,
which is easier to do in the state of Hawaii because most of us live on this one island, right? So you can
yeah,
go and see them. But when the pandemic hit, and I was like, okay, well, can't do that anymore. You kind of lost that where the team was together in the office, and this was obviously before like tools like Nooks and things like that really were available. So to your point, what we did was we just blocked time each day, or on a regular basis. So, okay, we're gonna, some of the reps got together. So, okay, we're gonna do calls. We're gonna jump on Zoom, and we're just gonna round robin it. Like, this person will make a call. They'll put it on speaker so we can hear the back and forth, while the other reps listen in. And yeah, I'm entering notes from my previous call that I was on, but I'm listening. And inadvertently, it was like, oh, that was a really good way that you addressed that. Or, hey, like, that was struggling. That call was a battle. Why don't you try this next time? And so, that helped. Once people kind of got over the nerves of like performing in front of their peers, that they found was that, hey, this is this is great for others to hear me, but I'm also getting great feedback. So yeah, even if you're remote, like how do you find ways to bring people in with you, even if it's just 20 minutes a day, like
Yeah.
it's gonna sharpen yourself. Right? So,
Yeah. No, I just absolutely love that.